Okay, good afternoon. Uh, I'm Yerivan Saeed, the Barzani Scholar in Residence and the Director of the Global Kurdish Initiative here at the School of International Service. It's really great pleasure to welcome all of you and also welcome our moderator, Sivan, and also our panel, Doshad and Aliza, to this very timely panel on the future of the Kurds in Syria. We are meeting at a moment when the future of the Kurds is being shaped in real time from multiple fronts under pressure. Key decisions have been made and rights have been negotiated in rooms sometimes far from the people most affected. And what is more troubling is it is the people, the Kurds, that pay price on the ground. Let me flag a few developments to shape or frame our discussions today. First, the security picture remains unstable in Syria. In early January and also in mid-January, we saw clashes between Kurdish forces and also Syrian government affiliated forces, which led to civilian casualties and also significant displacements in northeastern part of the country. Second, talks and deals are moving very quickly, but the outcomes are still very unclear. On January 30th, there was a deal or ceasefire between the Kurds and Damascus, even though they agreed on some sort of phased integration, but the hard questions have remained unresolved, and that includes command and control, local security, what local governance means for the Kurds, and what control and sort of, if we can call it autonomy, the Kurds will have in their own dominated region in Syria. And third, which I think is very, very important, even as the Kurdish forces face setbacks in Syria, two very important development roads as a result of that. The first one is the cross-border solidarity and Kurdish nationalism. We have seen sustained demonstration in Europe, in North America, as well as in the Kurdistan region, fundraising drives aid to Western Kurdistan. The Kurdistan region was central for this response and effort in the streets as well as at the leadership level diplomacy. The second one is diplomatic visibility. The Kurds in Syria are no longer, I believe, treated as just the fighters fighting ISIS. Now they are showing up in international forums, as we saw last week in Munich Security Conference, where Muslim Abdi and Ilham Ahmed, the Kurdistan region president, Nitrevan Barzani, even though the Kurdistan region president and also prime minister in the past have been invited to the forum, but this was the first time for the Kurds in Syria to be invited and to be a part of it. They all both met with US officials, with the European officials as well, and also they met with the bipartisan delegation from Congress. They pressed for Kurdish rights and for Kurdish protection. And I think that's a very, very important development as well. I hope that our panelists are going to touch on this very too important one. And also we should not forget that hanging over all of this is the counter ISIS and also the humanitarian file in Syria as well, the detainees, camp policy, the risk of ISIS resurgence if governance and the security framework is going to break down in the future. This is why I think that today's discussion is very important. We are here to talk about what are the realistic paths ahead, and what are the trade-offs, what the Kurdish rights look like for in the future of the Syria and whether the Kurds will be able to get any constitutional rights in the future. So before I introduce our guests, I want to make a very important announcement. So don't go away, we're going to feed you some kebab, so stay. With that, let me introduce our guests here. We're very fortunate to have three Syrian experts or Kurdish experts. The first one is Sirwan Kajol, who is going to moderate our discussion here today. Sirwan is a journalist and researcher focused on the Kurdish affairs, Islamic militancy, and his work has appeared in Washington Institute, in the New Lines magazine, the Middle East Forum, and I think most importantly, he's also a Barzani Fellow here and also a master's student at the School of International Service here at the American University. He is also the author of a novel titled Nothing But Suit. Our first panelist is Aliza, who is sitting in the middle. Aliza Marcos, she is the author of The Blood and Belief, the PKK and the Kurdish Fight for Independence. Her new book, which you can pre-order on Amazon at the moment, is called Resurgence and Revolution, the PKK and the Kurdish Fight in Turkey and Syria. She worked for Reuters and Boston Globe in the Middle East, and she has received numerous awards in the past for her work. And our second panelist is Dorshad Osman, who is a founding member of the Kurdish Advocates, a Washington, DC-based group that advocates for the Kurdish rights. But Dorshad is a cybersecurity threat intelligence engineer based in Virginia. He might be hacking us at the moment. He's originally from Dilek in Western Kurdistan. He has been engaged in advocacy focused on democratic value, human rights, and Kurdish representation. He brings data-driven perspective shaped by his work investigating state-linked cyber threats. He holds Masters of Science in Computer Science. So Siran, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yerivan, and thank you for the Kurdish Global Peace Initiative for Peace, for the opportunity, for you, Dr. Yerivan, and for Kenza and other staff members who made this possible. This is such a timely and important event. As we are speaking right now, things are changing in Rojava and Syria, so this should reflect that, those changes happening around the clock in the region. Before we get into the conversation, we will have 90 minutes today. We'd like to keep it conversational for the panel for the first hour, and then the remaining half an hour, we will open it for a Q&A. We also have people watching us online. So I will allow some of those questions if time permits. I'm gonna jump into what Dr. Yerivan ended with. And Eliza, I want to start with you. A lot happened in the past 4 weeks that people are confused, myself included. What's going on, really? Not only what's going on, but what this means, as the title of this event suggests, for the future of the Kurds in Syria.
Okay, thanks. And yeah, is this working? I guess, great. Okay, so to talk about the now and the future, I just want to go back a few months and provide some context. So I was last in Rojava in November, and this was a time of great hope and excitement in Rojava. The peace process between Turkey and the PKK had meant that Turkey had halted its attacks on Kurdish activists and PKK cadre in Rojava. The fact is the PKK had called off, a few months earlier, the PKK had formally called off its war against Turkey. It had done a symbolic disarmament, and talks were underway with Öcalan. So as a result, Turkey pulled back from its attacks. The thing was, there were new cafes, there were film festivals, there were those sorts of businessmen you find in all these places who are looking to make deals suddenly. What there wasn't was a big attention on negotiations with Shara. I spoke with a number of the Kurdish officials who were involved in the negotiations, and they had sort of a wait-and-see attitude. And why is that? Well, from their perspective, the longer this went on, the better. They had signed a preliminary agreement the previous March, but in the meanwhile, they were trying to consolidate their hold over the territory. They were trying to bring in new investment. They were looking for new support from Israel and the United States. Basically, from their perspective, the longer this went on, the better. From Shara's perspective, from Damascus's perspective, it was the same thing. Shara was trying to establish stronger control over his military. He was also trying to build up allies and support for his view. And he didn't see a need to immediately negotiate with the Kurds either. He wanted to be in a position of power. So what's changed? It was the U.S. lifting the Caesar sanctions, obviously. That gave him the legitimacy. And that also gave him a tool, which I think is not often discussed, to say to Arabs who were in the SDF and in villages and cities controlled by the Kurds that, look, I have something to give you now. I'm going to have a new economy. We're going to have money coming in. I can provide you with something that the Kurds can't provide you. So that I think all that came together, and as we know, then there was the attack in Sheikh Massoud in Aleppo, and gradually the Kurds were pushed back to a territory that they had really controlled back in 2012, 2013. It was the sort of the fundamental areas that they controlled. That was obviously a big blow to Kurds and Kurdish supporters, but what we saw in this time was a growth and you spoke about this, a growth of Kurdish internationalism. You had a huge outcry of support for the Kurds, and this was incredibly important because it was really the first time you saw that for Rojava, something that wasn't PKK-led. In fact, the PKK, which plays an important, huge role in Rojava, did not actually send soldiers there. The PKK was very careful to say, we want people to support Rojava, but we're not sending our own people there. So they maintained, in that sense, they understood they had to maintain the ceasefire to keep some sort of control over the area and avoid Turkey from going in. So I think that political support for Kurds is something that's really changed the dynamics and offers us a new hope for going forward. Now we have, we've had Munich, we've seen Mazlum Abdi on the stage, Ilham Ahmet, all this again shows a new diplomatic force for Kurds. I would say that I'm really very optimistic going forward, which is not always, I don't think everybody is. And I would say there are a couple of reasons. One, over the past 14 years, Kurds have lived under their own system. You have a whole generation of young people in Rojava who've only known a Kurdish-led government. I think getting rid of that is a big risk to Shara. We don't know exactly what's in the agreement. I think Dilshad will talk more about that. But the fact is that it makes sense for Shara and for Damascus to move slowly because you don't want a new all-out conflict, especially one where you've seen that Masoud Barzani is now in support of the Kurds in Europe, in Turkey. There's a lot of reasons for even Turkey and Europe not to want to see a breakout of new violence because of threats in their own area to Kurdish protests and demands. I think this newfound unity is what's going to bring things forward, and I'm very optimistic also about the PKK's role in this. The PKK in 2003 formed the PYD, which is the main political party in Rojava. And at the time, the PKK promised the PYD, or said, not promised, but they formed PYD, they formed PJAK for Iran, they formed a small party for Iraq. And at the time, the idea was that these parties would operate almost quite independently, but autonomously of the PKK. They would be underneath a sort of general ideological umbrella, but they would operate based on what was happening on the ground. Now, that never happened because the PKK never, could not allow that sort of autonomous operation. But now, in fact, it is. This is where I see things going. Over time, I see the PKK being forced to withdraw. It already has been forced to withdraw some of its control. And what you'll see is really these sorts of parties operating autonomously in a way that they were first supposed to. And I think that gives me a lot of hope for the future of Rojava. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliza. You covered a lot of important points, and we'll definitely come back to discuss them in detail. But I want to go back to how these events developed a few weeks ago. Dilshad, the Syrian Democratic Forces signed an agreement back in March 2025. A lot happened until January 2026. But didn't the SDF see this coming? didn't, because one of the criticism that is going around right now is that the SDF only used the time factor to push the negotiations to at some point. I'm not obviously blaming them for what happened, but I think it deserves to be discussed, like why it reached the point where, in addition to the points that when al-Shara felt more in control, he had more leverage both domestically and internationally to wage this and end it militarily. We should also ask why the SDF did not do anything in the meantime between March 2025 and January 2026.
Thanks, Iran. Let's just go back to March. And I think that agreement happened 2 days after the big massacre that happens in the coastal areas against the Alawites. And it was a winning card for al-Shara to go out of that huge trouble. But also it was a winning card for the SDF at that time, showing to the Americans and to the international community that we are working on an integration with the Syrian government. We're not separatists. We're not, all these claims. So at that time, a high-level agreement saved both sides for a specific period of time. And I think I will disagree with you that SDF did not do much. They were in Damascus. They were on the tables, negotiating multiple times. Even the Monitor reported before Sheikh Mahsoud that in November, they were sitting in a negotiation room when al-Shaybani walked in the room and he ended the discussion. There was a lot of pressure from Turkey on how to shape that agreement. And I think al-Shara found, or actually understood that attacking Sheikh Mahsoud was a good mobilization moment for his base and his supporters. And also to show the Arab faction in SDF that, hey, we're taking Sheikh Mahsoud. It's an opportunity for you also to defect from SDF, probably join us. And I think that was a perfect moment for al-Shara to go on. So I think SDF was trying to negotiate and integrate, but Damascus was not open.
Yeah, just a follow-up. Do you think that if first of all, the March 10th agreement was not clear to begin with. It was vague, and it was probably kept vague for the purpose of, prolonging, especially on the Syrian regime side, the process and wait for a moment like this to take advantage of the security situation. So definitely SDF is not the side to blame for this, because, we all know how this round of violence started. But I guess like Eliza also mentioned this, the areas under Kurdish control, direct Kurdish control right now, are pretty much, I would say, at least 60% of what the Kurds initially controlled back in 2025. So for many, this might be seen as a major setback, but for many others, it's also, keeping the status quo. What started back in 2012, with the exception of Afrin and Syria and other areas, and who knows what's going to happen to Kobani. But Kurdish heartland, for the most part, is still under Kurdish control. So how do you view this?
Yeah,
in the context of this integration process, obviously.
Absolutely. So not only the areas that actually Kurds are controlling, even if in Afrin, I don't know if you've been following, but for the past week, Damascus government have been assigning like heads of municipalities and other positions to Kurds inside Afrin. And I'm hearing news about families going back to Afrin. So there will be more developments, I would say positive developments, which is part of the agreement, obviously, when it comes to Afrin. I mean, as someone who was born and raised in Rojava, for me, 2012 was definitely a great moment. Kurds took over our own cities and towns. Today, we're back to 2012, but I will compare that to pre-2011. Pre-2011, 300,000 of us had no citizenship. Language was forbidden. Even we did not have a post in a municipality. So I think the achievements that the SDF and mainly the YPG did we're taking its fruit now. And I think the Kurds being in control in their towns and in their cities is a great, it's actually a good achievement, because you're talking to the Kurdish streets and telling them, like, here we are, we're still here, we're still in control of our towns, but also you make it easy for al-Shara to negotiate. Having SDF in Raqqa and in Deir ez-Zor was a huge pressure, political pressure, even on SDF to negotiate with Damascus, because they're not negotiating as Kurds, they're negotiating as northeast Syria. And it brings a lot of complexity, social complexity. Meanwhile, it's much easier as a Kurdish group to go and negotiate with Damascus. These are our demands, full stop. It makes it easier even on Damascus. And I think Damascus stopped there, not to overcomplicate the situation, but also to have maybe an easy way to negotiate with the Kurds.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at things. Eliza, I think, the fact that there's a whole generation that grew up in Rojava, including family members of mine, that don't know Arabic, for example. They grew up learning Kurdish. Dilshad and I didn't get the chance to enjoy those newfound freedoms. But how do you tell this generation of young Kurds in Rojava that this is all they know? If you were born in 2005 and went to school in 2011, then you're going to college in Rojava, learning Kurdish. For a lot of people, it's taken for granted, but for Kurds in Turkey and in Iran and in Syria, it's a huge deal to be able to speak the language. Now, Mazloum Abdi, the SDF commander, said something interesting yesterday or the day before. He gave a lot of interviews, very fascinating insight into what's going on. But he said the Syrian regime has a problem of terminology in terms of naming things the way they are or not naming them the way they are. So from a Kurdish perspective, what happened could be a major step toward further autonomy for Rojava proper. Do you see it that way? Do you see that Kurds have the opportunity to actually claim something more durable? Because everyone knew since 2011, since 2012, that the arrangement that the Kurds had was temporary, as long as Damascus was still under Bashar al-Assad's control. So how do you see the prospects for an actual autonomy in Rojava? Or it's too late to talk about that?
Maybe too early to talk about it, but I want to go back to the idea that this is now Kurds controlled, say, what, 60% of what they did in 2012, and that, now they can go to Damascus with a straight, Kurdish demand. The fact is that the Rojava experiment and the SDF were all built on this idea of democratic confederalism and the PKK, and this idea of Arab and Kurdish unity and Christians and Muslim and everybody all together. And so I think, and that is how the PKK through affiliates governed as well. And that was the ideology that was in the schools and that was in the streets, and that even as much as I think many Kurds always sort of said, yes, we have this ideology, but ultimately we're Kurdish nationalists, nonetheless, this was the sort of unifying factor. And I do think that the local authorities there are going to face a challenge now, kind of recalibrating. And this is also an area where we have to look and see, like, how will the PKK handle this? Because as much as the PKK it's formally ended its war, it still maintains a lot of control and influence throughout the region through its various organizations, through cultural groups, through political groups, social groups, and through armed groups. I mean, there are still, more than 1,000 foreign cadre in Rojava. That's one number that's given. It's I'm sure it's much more than that, than 1,000. You obviously have cadre in Kandil and in Iraqi Kurdistan waiting to hear where they're going to go, what's going to happen with the peace process in Turkey. You have political cadre in Turkey, you have political cadre in Europe. So you do have this organization here that has, led and benefited from what's happening in Rojava. And now I feel like they may need to come up with a new ideology or somehow explain this change. In order to continue to maintain influence, which they will definitely want to do. So in terms of long-term, medium-term for autonomy for Kurds, I do think it's a possibility, but I mean, so much has to happen right now that we don't know. But like I said before, I think or maybe as Mazloum put it, it's a question of what do you call it? Are you going to call it autonomy? Or are you going to say, well, you can have your own schools? How much are you going to formalize this in negotiations with Shar? And I think both sides right now appear willing to have a certain vagueness in the negotiation. So maybe they don't use the same terminology, but ideally it might be going to the same area. Thank you.
We will talk about the peace process between the PKK and Turkey for sure. But just to follow up on one of the points that you raised, I think it was 2 days ago, well, a few days ago, Erdogan, the Turkish president, expressed he basically showed that he was content with the agreement, the January 29 agreement. And someone said on X, I thought it was interesting that if Erdogan is happy with this, we shouldn't be happy, as Kurds, obviously. So Turkey is in an interesting situation. You have the peace process going on or not going on, depending on who you talk to. But you also have this, because for a lot of Syria and Turkey watchers, the Turkish government policy in Syria was, for the most part, driven by, antagonizing the Kurds or the Kurdish experiment in Syria. How would this agreement, obviously it's still in the early stages, reflect how Turkey views the peace process? We'll talk more about this, obviously, but I just wanted to see your initial views on how Turkey views this situation in Rojava.
I mean, Turkey obviously wants to minimize Kurdish gains in Rojava. I mean, I think there's no question. So they're looking at the agreement from maybe the same side as Shara right now, which is it really doesn't promise that much. The same thing, I think Turkey's being very practical. Their goal is really to remove the foreign cadre from Rojava in the short term, and so they're working in that direction. Although it obviously depends on the negotiations between Turkey and the PKK and where these foreign cadre can return to. But I think that Turkey is also taking a wait-and-see attitude, and partly because, again, new conflict, an all-out battle in Rojava doesn't serve anybody. And I think that's the warning that they're also getting from Masoud Barzani and from others that, only an all-out battle is going to destroy this if it does. And is that worth it? Because that destabilizes Syria as well. There's a lot of investment going in there. I mean, do you really want that right now? So I think Turkey is willing to take away, not to be excited about the agreement, but so far to say, okay, we can live with, this where it's going.
Yeah. Dilshad, I understand that you have some fresh information that you can share with this crowd with regards to the integration process that is taking place right now. But I want to tie that to SDF commander and Ilham Ahmed's, Mazloum Abdi and Ilham Ahmed's presence and participation in the security conference, Munich Security Conference a couple of days ago, and how that reflected on the level of talks between the two sides, between Damascus and the SDF, as part of the integration process, and also the level of trust between the two sides. That going to see Secretary Marco Rubio in one delegation, and I think they held three meetings with the same group, with the Saudis, with the Americans, and I forgot the other meeting. But how do you see this? Mazloum Abdi seems very confident about the fact that the SDF, at least in Hasaka, will remain an intact force, 3 brigades as part of one division, in Hasaka, and he knows where they will be deployed. A similar arrangement will be made for Kobani, obviously a brigade that will be part of the Aleppo division. But tell us more. What did you hear earlier that you wanted to share with us?
Sure. I think let's start by saying both sides are survivors. Both sides wants to survive. And I think there was a huge amount of pressure on both sides to get this done. And the result of it was the pictures that we saw in Munich. Both sides are showing that they're serious about this integration. They sat on the same side of the table to cool things down in Washington, D.C. And I think that's, and the rest of the world. And I think that was the message. Where things are going. In computer science, we have terminology where we call updates of production system, in live production system, which is a dangerous thing to do. You cannot just change things in a system that it's operating. You need to test it before. But we don't have this privilege in Rojava or in Syria, I think. And what we're witnessing now is a defining of these multiple agreements that were signed between Damascus and the SDF, and they're just experimenting. And I just have some fresh information on how this will look like on the administrative sides. You mentioned the integration between SDF and Damascus. SDF is saying that integration is going to be as a unit. SDF will be 4 different divisions, but they're going to integrate as a full unit in the military. Damascus is saying, no, we're going to form 4 new divisions, and then individuals from SDF will integrate. As you said, Muslim said, we have an issue with Damascus when it comes to terminology, and I see another different terminologies being thrown out, but it really means the same thing. SDF is going to join as 4 different blocks with the Syrian army. Now, the situation, from what I learned, the situation in Northeast is going to be totally different than Kobani. Kobani, it's going to be handed to an internal security division. There will be no Syrian army, but most likely there will be very few SDF presence in there. And there will be more internal security presence from the Kurdish sides in Kobani. And the Syrian army is going to withdraw. That's in Kobani. In Northeast, the Syrian army is withdrawing to the south of Hasakeh, and SDF is going to go to Derik, Qamishli, and Amuda, and it will be stationed there. When it comes to the security side, currently Marwan Ali, who was assigned by Damascus, is going to lead the organization. The VP is going to be Kurdish. Wherever you see a president from Damascus of an organization or something, there will be a VP from Rojava, or the opposite. If you see a head of an organization from Rojava, the deputy will be from Damascus. This was agreed on in the past couple of 2 days. Another thing, there will be an undersecretary of Ministry of Defense who will be from SDF. And I think Muslim announced it today too. There is another update also that the heads of internal security branches are going to be Kurds. So in Amuda and Qamishli and in Derik, the heads of intelligence or security, internal security branches are going to be locals. So this is where they got today. There are 2 different updates. They signed an agreement with the Ministry of Health to integrate the Department of Health, which used to operate in Rojava, which used to operate as a Ministry of Health. They will be integrated as the Administration of Health in Al-Hasaka, but the hierarchy is going to stay exactly the same. That's another thing. The Minister of Municipalities in Syria yesterday gave up a lot of their privileges to local administrations, which is also another message of how, or another message we can read on how they are expanding a little bit the privileges and the powers of local municipalities. And I think this is where we're heading.
Yeah, and most importantly, most, if not all, employees of the autonomous administration will get to keep their jobs as part of this integration. So people will still be run the same places that they've been running for the past decade.
Exactly. And I think currently on the military side, there is an ongoing negotiation how this is going to happen, but it is crystallizing. And I think next is going to be education after healthcare. And it'll keep going.
How does the 13th presidential decree, Eliza, come into this? Obviously, it focuses more on, granting citizenship to those who were, stripped from it back in 1962, and the right to speak and teach Kurdish throughout Syria. And obviously, they didn't. The decree doesn't call it an official language; they call it a national language, which is different. How does this fit into because Mazloum Abdi also talked about this, that this could be something that both sides can build on as part of the negotiations.
Yeah, no, I mean, and just to go back first to how the administrative structures are being absorbed into the state. I mean, this is incredibly important because essentially what you have is you have autonomous structures which are now going to be able to operate within the state structure, but I mean, to a certain extent, they keep their own control. They keep their own autonomy within Syrian rules and regulations. And I think that's, so that makes all the difference. I mean, and that's a huge gain for the administration and for the PYD and even PKK demands. I mean, ultimately, this shows that they've created something and it's going to be potentially stable. So and language rights and citizenship. Look, citizenship was something I understand that Assad also had mentioned in 2010. So, it's great, but I mean, and I think it's really important for people, but it's not necessarily the massive game changer. That something more quiet, like the way that the structures are being absorbed into the system, which I think in some ways is even more important. And obviously education and somehow, consolidating that in the Constitution, when there is a Constitution, will give a lot of security to people. And I think this is, we see this in Turkey too with the negotiations for Kurdish demands. People want to see changes there because otherwise all these changes can be changed back like the next day.
So, Liza, I want to shift gears towards this initially, as you said at your opening remarks, that what happened in Rojava has been a PKK influenced experiment. Can we say the same thing, that the experiment is still ongoing, it's just evolved into something different? Or is it over? Because you hear both arguments right now.
No, I don't think the experiment is over yet. And I think the PKK is changing and it's evolving. And so its methods of control and its ideology will also have to change. But in the short to medium term, as I mentioned, the group has a lot of organizational structures throughout the world, and especially in Rojava. And I think that, you don't expect those people to disappear and you don't expect those structures to disappear. And there's an argument to be made that you need some of these for stability, that this is how the region has been governed for the past 14 years, and just removing this suddenly will cause, it'll cause instability. I think, you and I have talked a lot with KNC and NKS opposition Kurdish figures, and they've often said that they want more of a say in the administration, and they don't want to be governed, however, by foreign PKK cadre. That's always been their thing. I've always found it interesting that they'll say, we need the foreign cadre out, but the Syrian cadre, they can stay because they're Syrian and they can work with us. So I do think that this is an opportunity, and Mazloum has talked about this recently, is to bring the KNC in more actively. There's talk about bringing the Peshmerga, the Rojava Peshmerga, who are, were opposition young people who went to Iraqi Kurdistan and were trained by Masoud Barzani's KDP as a fighting force to go back to Syria, but the PYD or SDF never allowed them to come back. So I do think that we can see sort of a softening. And again, to go back, like this was the PKK's original idea, was the PYD and these groups in Rojava would operate based on what they saw best at the time. And I think we are moving towards that.
Yeah, Todd, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this issue as well, because a lot changed in the past few days. Things that were unthinkable months ago, even like allowing the Barzani Charity Foundation, for example, to enter Rojava for the first time since the beginning of the conflict. I thought that was a huge deal. And also, the PYD being more open to other Kurdish entities and other Kurdish political forces in the region, allowing all these networks, media networks that were banned for a long time to come and operate in Rojava. Of course, this was during an extraordinary crisis, but things seem to be moving in a positive direction when it comes to being the PYD and the local system in Rojava more accepting in terms of other ideologies and others to operate in the region.
Definitely. Again, this is a very dynamic organization. They went through a lot of thought process, changed their ideology multiple times. And I think because it's a military-driven organization, this is the right time for them to rethink their strategy. And I think it's happening. One, two, the Kurdish street stood up and protected the experiment. Let's be clear. The Kurds, even those that they disagreed with PYD, defended the existing of this organization.
That's an interesting fact. So yes.
And not only in Rojava, but in Bashur, in Bakur, in all other parts of Kurdistan, in diaspora. And I think this was a strong message to the administration. As Kurds, we will protect you, but you really need to maybe come closer to us, I would say, rethink some stuff. And I think it's happening, as we say, in production now. And I think even the leaders of Rojava, like Muslim or Ilham, their messaging has been very good toward the Kurdish community in Rojava and outside. And I think this is great momentum to keep it going. So they understand for them to be protected today is to accept the fact that your foundation is the Kurdish community and Kurdish society.
Going back to optics in the Munich conference and the security conference in Munich a couple of days ago, there are obviously two different interpretations of those meetings that were held between the Syrians, the Kurds, and the Syrian regime on one side, and the others on the other side. It has still part of the argument, at least online, that this could be sending certain messaging that the SDF is basically part of the Syrian state right now, but it could also be construed as Syria is not the same. Syria is changing, and this is what Shaybani, the foreign minister, the interim foreign minister, was basically trying to say during those meetings, that it's different. So, Dishat, I want to start with you, but also for Eliza, how do you see this as the integration process is being defined on the ground? How do you see what happened in Germany reflects the reality on the ground?
I mean, both sides talk to their bases. Like, this is a new fact; we should accept it. In the recent hearing in the Congress on the Committee of Foreign Affairs, it was clear that the U.S. is viewing how successful is Syria, or the political process in Syria, by how successful they are with integrating SDF within the government. It's not an option for al-Shara to fail today. And I think it was a must-do thing to show to their base that we cannot not survive without integrating SDF successfully within the state. And they sat on the same table, on the same side. And I think that was a message. And the Syrian, the public opinion is starting to accept that fact. Like, SDF is going to stay in the picture. Better to have it integrated with the ministry rather than just keep fighting with them.
Yeah, so you're part of a newly established organization, the American Kurdish Advocates, AKA. How does that, I guess, impact your own advocacy in DC when you talk to lawmakers, policymakers? The arguments that you would make about abuses by the Syrian government and groups affiliated with the Syrian government, at least in the Kurdish region, how do you justify what's happening on the ground with what people saw in Germany?
I mean, it's at the end of the day, Syria has been going through an awful war, and expect bad videos like the one we saw in the Congress to show up everywhere. But your end goal is to stabilize the country. And I think this is really what matters. As AKA, we've been trying to work with the US policymakers and the US public opinion to ask for not to give a blanket check to Ahmed al-Shara, have some controls over them. I advocated against sanctions on Syria for many years. I know how bad sanctions they are, and I'm not pro like imposing new sanctions on Syria, but you need to have controls over the government of Damascus. Eliza mentioned a very good point. Like, al-Shara gained a lot of like self-trust and esteem to carry military operations in Sheikh Mahsoud because Caesar Acts was lifted. That shows us a fundamental issue with his ways of thinking. So we should not empower him. We should have always our eyes focused on him, have some mechanism to actually punish him in case he is driving Syria to a destabilized position. I just want to go back to the point of the experiment in northeast Syria. As I mentioned, Syria has been going through an awful war for the past 15 years, but northeast Syria was one of the most stable region in the area. So the ideology of the PKK of like having Arabs and Kurds and Christians rule themselves worked for 15 years. Dynamics changed today, and probably some of our Arab brothers and sisters found a different way to work with Damascus. But we did not see a lot of like massacres like happened in the coastal areas or in Sweden, which shows you that experiment actually delivered something on at least building a healthy social relationships between societies. So I should say the experiment did not fail, but probably the conditions of having that experiment don't exist anymore. So we're shifting to some another model.
Thank you. Eliza, your views, optics matter. So how did you see those meetings?
Yeah, no, I mean, I saw a lot of the discussion afterwards, especially on X with, this showed that Muslim had given up because he sat near the Syrian minister. No, this showed that, I mean, look, ultimately what you have two veteran PKK commanders, whether, whatever you want to say, what their relationship is now, who went to Munich, who were accepted, who have led, the Rojava experiment for 14 years. So I don't think it matters who they sat next to, how close they sat to them. At the end of the day, they're accepted as interlocutors. They're accepted as legitimate leaders. And that means that their, demands, whether they'll be ultimately fulfilled or not, we don't know, but their demands at least are being taken seriously. And I think the work that was being done in the US Congress and like with your group and what we've seen with with Barzani and in Europe has been super important because it's a reminder to everybody that this is not just it's a local problem in one sense, but it's also a regional problem. And ultimately, the SDF and the Kurds did fight with the US against ISIS, and they were the bulwark against an Islamic resurgence there. And in the future, they can be too a place for stability, a force that can help if there is an ISIS resurgence. I think all that will help the Kurds going forward if they continue to operate in this more unified fashion.
Yeah, something else that I thought was interesting, the fact that for 11 years, the Kurds, the SDF were, at the forefront in terms of, a very, very important security problem, not just in the Middle East, but around the world. And they didn't get the opportunity to go to such a platform in Germany. Yet, after we saw the SDF, I would argue with its diminishing role in this capacity in the fight against ISIS, you still get the chance to go there. So I thought that was an interesting, for me, an interesting observation that a lot of people made. I want to briefly talk about and you both talked about this, but I want to get into the role of the KRG as a whole, but the Barzanis in particular, that they played both politically, financially, but also diplomatically on the global stage for, in support of the Kurds in Syria. So, Eliza, I want to start with you.
Okay, great. Well, just to go back, Masoud Barzani and the Kurdistan Regional Government had tried for many years to adjudicate between the PYD and the opposition Kurdish National Congress, or NKS. And all those agreements failed, largely because, in my opinion, the PYD, was not willing to share power in a real sense. And Masoud Barzani's KDP wanted, and the parties really wanted a share of the government. So relations were, they weren't great over the past few years, but they weren't too outwardly hostile. Nonetheless, Masoud Barzani in many ways remains the a very important pan-Kurdish leader still. I would argue, Öcalan is one, Barzani is the second, and the end of the war between the PKK and Turkey and the end of Turkish bombings on Iraqi Kurdistan territory and the reduction in hostility between Barzani and KDP and the PKK really allowed him to work more positively with Rojava and allowed the people in Rojava also to see Barzani less as a threat, not to see the KDP affiliated parties as a threat, but see them as a potential partner. In his view, I believe and I mean, I haven't talked to him, but I mean, from my analysis, I would say, you have a situation where Barzani, the KDP, and also the PUK understand that if Rojava falls, Iraqi Kurdistan is next. This is really an important symbol. I think it's also important for Masoud Barzani personally now. I mean, he helped, his party helped bring the Kurdish opposition together with the PYD last year after Shara took over. He has a vested interest now in seeing this succeed. So yes, when the Rojava administration finally allowed the Barzani charity to enter, it was also a sign that they no longer see the Barzanis as enemies, and they no longer believe that the Barzanis are controlled by Turkey, which is one thing they often said.
Yeah, very interesting indeed, because even in a symbolic thing that I kept seeing across Rojava when the Kurdistan flag was effectively banned in Rojava for a long time, and then suddenly see on all these buildings, government buildings, you have Kurdish. Obviously, it's a symbolic gesture. They will probably be taken down, once this integration reaches the administrative level. But it shows also how much local Kurds also view like this pan-Kurdish nationalism has been there, but suddenly emerged in such a big way in Rojava and was manifested not only in Rojava, but across Kurdistan and Europe and the Kurdish diaspora in Europe and North America. So I thought that was an interesting redefinition of Kurdish unity, if not political, at least popular, at the popular level. So Dilshad, I want to turn to just, at the beginning of the, as the Kurds were, before and after they were negotiating the March 10th agreement, a lot of other minority groups, especially the Druze and the Alawites, view the SDF and the Kurdish experiment in Rojava as a flagship, as something that could be, duplicated elsewhere. It could be a blueprint for local governance elsewhere in Syria. And a lot of people even went further by thinking that this could be leading to something more permanent, an unofficial kind of alliance between minorities, an alliance that could be led by the SDF down the road. Do you think they still view, they still have the same hopes that they did a few months ago?
Let me just, actually, during the March agreement, majority of like Syrian national groups and Druze in the Druze area or the coastal area actually were viewing SDF in a very suspicious way. I have lots of friends from Sweden. They viewed SDF as a separatist group, and their narrative was very anti-SDF until what happened to them in July and in March happened, and they experienced that. Currently, there are some changes in their views. Because the way they countered, like, at least let's talk about the Druze in the south. The way they countered Damascus is by forming their own military groups. So they started by forming the military groups, and then they started building their own administration, organizations and stuff. Currently, SDF military supposedly is going to be part of the Syrian government, so they view it as a failed experiment. But I think if this integration moves forward and become a successful application between Damascus and the Northeast, it can be a very positive model that can be used, adopted at least by the Druze in the south. And I believe even Ahmed al-Sharaa is looking at this as a way out of the crisis that it's in the south. How can you control your army, which majority of them have a jihadi backgrounds, and they're motivated to go and redo the same massacre? A week ago in Sweden, 4 farmers got a permission to go harvest their olive, and they got killed by security forces. So there is no trust in your army. So how can you create a model in Northeast and apply it in Sweden to reintegrate Sweden and Syria? And I think there is a hope where public opinion is looking at the Northeast experiment currently, or the Rojava experiment, and try to adapt that. On the military side, there is still that understanding that eliminating SDF means the failure of the experiment. But I think maybe positive development might change that view.
Yeah, but don't you think that this takes us back to the decentralization argument? That the fact that the SDF will remain as an intact force, at least in Hasaka province in Rojava, shows that this could work. I mean, this is one of the most, if not the most progressive force throughout Syria, and they agreed to work with the military that is dominated by extremists and jihadists. So if you look at it from a perspective of, in a decentralized system, it could be possible, and look what happened in the Northeast. Do you think others will view it the same way that some Kurds would do, that if we get to keep the forces and they're part of the Syrian defense structure, then we have no problem?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's no way out of it, to be honest. Like, unless you follow such model. Like, I don't think there's an appetite to create a state in the south, in Sweden or in Rojava. So that's the only way for us forward. And to be honest, Siron, if we think the problem with SDF or the military confrontation that might happen with the Druze is the biggest problem, we're wrong. Economically, Syria is dying. Like, the situation on the ground is horrible. There is a huge public opinion that is being boiling against the current government in Damascus for their mismanagement, for their empty promises. And I'll give you an example. Aleppo is the heart of the industrial industry, the production of industry in Syria, and it's being destroyed by opening the borders for imports from Turkey and other stuff. People in Aleppo are upset by how Damascus is managing their economy. So I don't think decentralization will just solve military issues, but might actually solve other issues like economical issues, or like take Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa, for example. The SDF is out. There's no administrations there. Damascus is not interested in doing anything in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. The only way actually people in Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa, they have a list of demands. And I will quote Mohammed Abdullah, another like Syrian American activist, who literally said, guys, this is decentralization. What you're demanding is decentralization. So I think the only way for even Damascus to succeed is to let some of their power to go to the regions.
Thank you. Liza, you wrote 2 books on the PKK. Your most recent book, the one coming up in a couple months, is specifically about the PKK in Turkey and Syria. So I really want to go back. Obviously, we talked about this briefly, but I think it's important for the audience to understand that Kurdish, I mean, let me reframe this. Not just the PKK experiment in Syria and Turkey to a certain extent, but the Kurdish cause across the Middle East is a transnational one in nature. Do you think by an agreement, an integration agreement between the SDF and Damascus, or a peace process in Ankara between the PKK and Turkey, this transnationalist nature of the Kurdish cause will transform into something different? Especially after we saw the mobilization in Bakur, in northern Kurdistan, and in other parts of Kurdistan in support of Rojava. So how do you see those dynamics?
Obviously, Abdul Öcalan's philosophy from the beginning has always been transnational, from one big Kurdistan to multiple little Kurdistans that would be controlled by different parties. I think, though, that's also been a weakness, because in each part of Kurdistan, you have different power centers that don't necessarily want to merge under one umbrella. So if anything, where we're going now is into that situation where maybe Kurds in Syria will have their own power center. Iraqi Kurdistan will be stable, no attacks anymore from the PKK against them, and Turkey likewise. And then only after that, after all parts of Kurdistan are stable with some sort of autonomy, then they can start talking about a sort of more pan-Kurdish solution. But I do think that given the interconnectedness of the problem, the structure of the region, the more that Kurdish groups can work together, at least in some sort of not necessarily making joint decisions, but recognizing and respecting each other, something that we've seen now develop in Rojava vis-a-vis the Kurds there and the Barzanis. I think the better for the long term.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's beyond ideology. I have family from Turkey. Dilshad has family from Iraqi Kurdistan. So it's that complex that makes it even more interesting beyond ideological divisions. I think we hit the 1 hour mark, so right on time. Thank you, guys. I want to open it to Q&A. I know, I'm not sure if we have any online questions, but we will probably keep that towards the end. Let's start with the audience here. I want to please make it clear that please keep it short and keep it to a question, not a statement, so we can have an opportunity for a more lively discussion. Thank you. Let's start with Anthony here. Oh, sorry, you're close. You're next, Anthony. Oh, well, it's okay. My bad.
Hello, my name is Anthony Avist-Visson. I've written for the Jerusalem Post, and I'm a current master's student at American University and the Mustafa Barzani Peace Fellowship Scholar. I've got a bunch of questions, but I'm just going to ask one question for now. What's the status of the peace process in Turkey? I mean, Öcalan recently announced the start of the second phase of the peace process. What does this necessarily mean?
Right, thanks. So yeah, Öcalan announced it. I think it would have been better if the Turkish government had announced it to show some sort of buy-in. But most recently, it seems that they're working. The commission has put together a report, and the report seems to say that now we need legal steps. So it's not really anything different than, I would argue, than 6 months ago. But the fact that the peace process continues, that there's been no violence, that the PKK is clearly not returning to armed struggle against Turkey, and Turkey does not seem willing to break the peace process by attacking, let's say, cadre in Rojava or even in Iraqi Kurdistan, is really important. So even in the absence of actual movement, I think the fact that you have this process is enough for now, because it's going to be a very difficult shift, especially for Turkey, because what the PKK has been talking about and the commission is, demobilizing cadre and having them go to Turkey. And so what you're looking at are, highly politicized, highly respected, very energetic people going to Turkey and working in the legal field for Kurdish politics. And I think that's going to pose some challenges for the Turkish state. So it may take a little bit of time, but I think generally, it's moving in the right direction. And I don't believe the PKK will go back to fighting. I don't think the conditions exist for it to do that.
Dilshad, do you want to add anything to it?
I'm really not following much, and I think Eliza
No,
covers a lot.
Thank you. All right, Siobhan, and then
Yes, hello. My name is Shivan. I'm a master's student here at SIS. I have two questions, one for you and the second one perhaps for Sivan or Dilshad. So the first question, when do you think Rojava will pass the Öcalan era and move toward nation building? The second question is, how do we convince Arabs to accept the concept of Rojava, especially those who overlook the Arab project of the 1970s, when previous Assad regime moved Arabs into Rojava to deny existence as a majority Kurdish region?
thank you. Eliza, first question.
In the medium term, I don't see much of a shift in terms of Öcalan's influence over Rojava. I mean, part of the reason is obviously, I mean, the PKK has always been very important in Rojava, and this is where Öcalan lived, and then the experiment over the past 12 years has been led by PKK affiliates. So, there's a great deal of influence there. I think it's going to take time for the cadre system to break down, take time for, a shift in how politics is done. But for now, I believe very much that it will continue. But obviously, look, you don't have Kandil, where the PKK's military base or political base is. They don't have the war to use anymore as a motivating factor. I think their power of calling people back from Rojava to Kandil for education is more limited. I mean, I don't, that's just not, it's not the same setup anymore without the war. So I think that there is a certain loosening of control over Rojava. But in terms of general influence, I think Öcalan still remains very important as a general ideologue. And certainly, I just want to say for women, too. I mean, Öcalan, the women's movement in Rojava is huge, and it's very important. And Öcalan, with his philosophy of equality for women and his support for women, has been, very much an important motivating factor for women. So I think that's something that is going to be held on by women in Rojava. And you can already see it from some of the comments by women in the armed forces. They're much more hardline in a way than we hear from Muslim.
Dilshad, second question was about, Arabization campaign that took place in the 70s. This is an interesting and very sensitive issue that even the PYD and the autonomous administration did not touch during, its more than a decade of rule in Rojava. So can you please talk about that?
I think the first part of your question is how to make Syrian Arabs accept Rojava, right? And I think integration is accepting Rojava. Maybe we're not going to call it Rojava. terminology, right? I don't think so. But integration is accepting us. That's one. Two, Al-Shara is announcing that the Kurdish language is becoming a national language, returning citizenships to those that they lost it, and other decisions also was a big shift that actually shaped at least impacted the public opinion, and we did not see backlash. Like in general, Syrians in general welcomed that decree. So I think it was viewed positively. But I think integration is the answer to your question. Now, there are multiple layers of complexity to this issue. And as Sirwan mentioned before, in 1962, citizenship was revoked, but also at the same period of time, in actually pre-1962, the unified government between Egypt and Syria shaped the country toward Arabism. And at that time, Syria was building a dam in Raqqa. And they destroyed 4,500 villages. And they brought Arabs from those regions and put them on the borders between Rojava and Turkey to disconnect the Kurds. So there are, my ancestors are from a village in the Rumelan area. Next to us, there is Rumelan al-Pasha, which is an Arabic village. So there are Arabic villages next to each Kurdish village. And they've been there for 60, 70 years now. And I think it was, as we say in the US, a can of worm PYD did not want to touch. But things need to be talked about because it's one of the demands of the Kurdish streets now. Like, hey, what about our lands that were taken from us in the 60s? And I think that's a longer discussion because what happened in Northeast happened also everywhere in Syria. The government took lands, took manufacturers, give them to the states or to the other people. So I think it's a bigger discussion on the Syria level of what's going to happen to those lands and those areas that were taken from the Kurds.
Thank you, Dilshad. We have a question here, so thank you for your patience. Rukan, I think. Oh. Yeah, sorry. He's been so patient with us. So, but you're next, I promise.
Thank you. Is it on? Is it on?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for the organizer and also for the participants. My name is Mustafa Kezri. I would like just to reflect on 2 points. And I believe that, the STF and also the Kurd as a whole in Syria, they have done a magnificent job. We need to, in evaluation of their performance, we need to employ a little bit of historical perspective. I remember 26 years ago, I used to work for a UN refugee agency and I had to go to Al-Hol. Al-Hol camp was established for the first group of refugees after the first Gulf War. And I came across a lot of stateless Kurds who basically, when they realized that I'm from the United Nations, they came and introduced themselves and they wanted to bring up their flight. I could not back then to bring their issues to the UN's basically committee that, we have 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 of, Syrian stateless persons. And of course, as you know yourself, as a stateless person, you're persona non grata. And 26 years later, we saw that last weekend in Munich, and also, how well Kurds were represented. But of course, that, I just feel that, part of the problems that the Kurds in Syria created for themselves, in my view, was at the leadership level. They don't allow other Kurds from other parts, or at least even, sympathetic, Europeans and Americans who would like to help them, to come and help them. As you mentioned, that this is a military-driven organization. Most of the cadre they don't really know how Washington, United Nations, and European capitals operates. They close it. They do not allow, even the other Kurds come and help them. So I hope that, the leadership in Syria understand that not to make a mistake that the Iraqi Kurds did 40, 50 years ago, and we do not want to, repeat their mistakes. So open up the leadership to new generations who have been educated in the West and how they know how the West operate, United Nations, Washington, London, and others. It was interesting to see that, not even a single op-ed that we could see in Washington Post or New York Times on what is happening by the Kurds themselves in Syria. This is one point. The second point that I would like to to reflect that I hope that, you bring up again to the Kurdish leadership that pushes the Al-Shah government to join the ICC, International Criminal Court, and then also ratified the relevant international organizations, human rights organizations, that the Assad government, refused. That is basically 2 points that I wanted to bring up.
Thank you. Thank you for being brief. Rukan?
Sorry.
Thank you. I'm Rukan. So the past month, we've seen that there has been a Kurdish mobilization in the diaspora. My question is to Aliza, because you have an extensive experience with the think tanks, everything in the DC. There's a Kurdish momentum right now, and what do you think? What should the Kurds do in DC area, especially in DC? Like, how can they make a difference or change the policies? Do you think they should integrate into the U.S. institutions? Should they have their own institutions? What will be your advice on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Eliza.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually look to you and other, people here, on what would be the best approach. I think, but what we've seen is that, it's important to have a voice everywhere, I think. And I know the Kurdish Peace Institute was created with the idea of actually kind of working as Kurds, around an issue, but that has not, I don't think it's so that's one important institute. But I think the more that Kurds integrate as a part, so we have like a Turkey program, an Iraq program. Why isn't there a Kurdish program? Similarly, we've often said with the U.S. government, there should also be a Kurdish policy, not just an Iraq policy, a Turkish policy. So I think that's sort of, activism and speaking out and trying to form that unity that, as Mustafa mentioned, you don't have that sort of wide table. You haven't had that wide table in Rojava where you have lots of different parties and people speaking up. It's been sort of dominated by one voice. So I think externally what we see is that the more Kurdish groups that join together and speak out, as we saw over the past few months over Rojava, the stronger the impact.
Thank you. Dilshad, anything to add?
Yeah, I think there are two layers to your question. One, definitely we should be everywhere. But I think as someone who's been living in the US for 14 years now, it clicked to us that we're also Americans and we should petition our elected representatives and talk to our government, not to let the Kurds, after they fought with the US against ISIS. And I mean, to be honest, I like something about the US government that always views the Kurds as one body, regardless if they are in Syria or in Iraq. So that also gives us the credit of the support the Kurds in Iraq gave to the US government in the 90s and in 2003. So the Kurds have always been like a good partner to the US. So we should just work more with the Kurds. And I think as Americans, we're working on that.
Thank you. Gentleman in the back, and then Alan, and then Omar. Please.
Thank you. I'm Greg F. Pendili, and I'm on the faculty here at School of International Service. My question deals with the Trump administration and its, policy now. It's pretty obvious they want to withdraw all U.S. troops from Syria. So obviously the SDF played a card that they were controlling the camps for the ISIS prisoners, and now a lot of those are being shifted to Iraq. So what is the impact of the withdrawal of U.S. troops going forward to the Rojava situation?
Thank you. Very good question. Dilshad, you want to start? Please?
Sure. So pre this withdrawal, I will quote our good friend Vladimir, who's a journalist that worked a lot on Rojava. He said the best think tank to Rojava is the Pentagon. And I think now that the Pentagon does not exist anymore, or it's going to withdraw its forces from Syria, I'm seeing a shift where U.S. diplomacy is working more with the Kurds. So pre this event, it was very hard for us as Kurds to speak to the Department of State. Their Syria desk was very anti-PYD, very anti-self-administration, even the whole idea of having like some form of governing for the Kurds in Syria. Now it's shifting. And I think the reason is because Turkey wanted the SDF to be integrated with Syria. And the US is telling Turkey, we gave you that now. So it's time for the US diplomacy to actually work more active on stabilizing Syria. And stabilizing Syria is accepting the Kurds as part of this government. So I'm seeing that shift happening on the diplomacy, and I'm a little bit optimistic. And I think long term, it's much better than having the Pentagon advocating for us, because at the end of the day, US soldiers are going to go back home. So having more stable, more sustainable model where US diplomacy pressuring al-Shara to accept the Kurds is much better and more welcomed effort.
Thank you. Eliza, do you have anything to add? Thank you. We have Alan here, and then Omar. I'll come. We have a lot of time too, so, well, not a lot, but we'll get to your questions, I promise.
Okay, first, my name is Alan Boblin. I'm with American Kurdish Advocates. Yesterday, I came across a document that I'm not sure if it was leaked or it was distributed by Ministry of Department of Justice, Iraqi Department of Justice. The list was included like 5,300 ISIS detainees were transported by U.S. Army to Iraq. 3,500 out of 5,300 were Syrians. So, and we also that since al-Shara took the power in Syria, we've seen President Trump keep giving him all these compliments, right? So if U.S. trust the interim Syrian government in Damascus, why they transported the 3,500 from Syrians from Syria to Iraq? That's my first question. I have second one also, please. I was at the House Foreign Relations hearing last Tuesday, and one of the congressmen asked a very important question. He asked that Tom Barak is the U.S. ambassador in Turkey, and he's the special envoy in Syria. How it come that he can perform his work to the best interest of the United States, and while he's performing these two duties? At any point, if he will do anything that will piss Turkey, he needs to count to 10. So do you think that if Tom Barak, if the United States government changed Tom Barak and have a new special envoy, that the policy in Syria will change? Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
I'll take the first question. You can take the Tom Barak question. Questions.
Good luck, Nisha.
No, I mean, I think, yeah, it was very interesting. I saw that same document, and obviously at the time there was a lot of sort of rumors or analyses that the U.S. didn't trust Shara and the military forces, which obviously which also contain jihadi forces and so on, with taking over these prisons. Later on, I think it was the U.S. that may have said that they were really worried just of a big outbreak of violence around the camps or prisons, and that there would be in that chaos everybody would escape, so they wanted to move them. So we don't know, but I think we all laughed at the right point when you said it, so we all have the same idea about that.
To your point on Tom Barak, as I mentioned in the previous question, there is a shift when it comes to U.S. diplomacy. Like even having Ilham Ahmed and Muslim Abdi in Munich is a pressure from the U.S. government and mainly the Trump administration. And I think that shift in diplomacy is working well. Turkey was not involved in the recent operations, military operations. This was new. I'm not saying like maybe Tom Barak pressured Turkey or had a role in convincing the Turks that there will be no threats, integration is going to keep going. But I can view his role currently as being a little bit positive because he has strong channels with the Turks. And to be honest, kingmakers in Syria are the Turks today. And you need someone with a good relationship with the Turks. Maybe I'm being too diplomatic here. I definitely think Tom Barak, prior to the SDF issue, mainly when it comes to the Druze massacres or the Alawite massacres, did not play a good role, put enough pressure on al-Shara. But in the recent developments, again, that shift needs to be really watched closely, and it's going to answer your question if Tom Barak's influence is positive or not.
Thank you. We have two questions here, so I'll start with Omar, and then I'll come back to this side of the room, I promise. Yes. Yeah, just hold it. Yes, there are people online also listening, so I want to make sure. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Omar Pakal from George Basin. So what my question is going to be, Alisa Marcus, since you have been reading and writing about PKK, and my question kind of is about the structural issue within the PKK. So the PKK has been one of the very successful movement at the grassroots. They gained so much achievement, but the movement, it was kind of failed to translate that grassroots achievement into institutional gain. So that issue, kind of structural issue within the PKK has been subject of the many research studies. They say movement lack of the professional and managerial class. And so kind of I'm seeing that, since the movement in Turkey and Syria, there's a shift in the politics from the revolutionary politics to the negotiated politics to the concession politics. But and then how movements going to create, it's a kind of, that the class of doing that kind of politics, because that we all know all that cadres, the PKK, was very much trained based off the revolutionary politics. And we are right now seeing kind of, the Kurdish movement from Turkey and the Middle East kind of, at a different stage. I was trying to, to understand how that structured issue of the PKK also kind of create some of the main pitfall of the PKK, to achieve those grassroots achievement into the institutional gain. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
So, I mean, from the start, to different degrees, the PKK has been a highly authoritarian organization. And so, that has hobbled, I think, the creation of kind of a technocrat or a diplomatic class. Because ultimately, to do that successfully, you have to devolve power and, give people the right to come up with their own theories, come up with their own experiences on the ground that they can utilize. But what the PKK has always done is, as people gain experience, if they're seen as a threat, a power threat, they're then shifted to somewhere else. Or if they have, if as a diplomat in Europe, a PKK diplomat in Europe, you believe X or Y, it doesn't really matter if Öcalan then says something or Cemil Bayik says something, you have to follow that. So as much as over the years, there's been a little more openness within the organization to some debates and discussions, ultimately that authoritarian structure, I think, has really hobbled the group from making these political gains that you're talking about. So going forward, where you have essentially the group no longer able to use the war to motivate people and to base its authority in fighting, I think that will naturally lead to a more relaxed atmosphere. But it will take some time because you still have cadre who will go in and, like, the heads of any political parties, they're going to feel they're in charge. They're the ones who fought. They're the ones whose families, sacrificed. And so they should be listened to. So I do see this as slowly shifting, but it's going to take some time.
Thank you. We have one more question here, and then we're coming back to this side. Right, yeah. Yes, please go ahead.
Sertaç Korkmaz from Turkey. I have a question for you, Aliza, and because following many years, I was working in Turkish presidency. Actually, I was covering the Syria and the PKK issues. So I have a very clear question. And do you think, is there any connection between the future of Erdogan and the PKK ongoing peace talks? Because he is the most pragmatic politician in the region. If he thinks that if he is not benefiting politically from the process, he can break the process. What do you think about it? Do you think that is it false spring in the region?
No, I think he sees a benefit, and also he's changed. I mean, in 2015, I would argue he didn't see a benefit anymore to the peace process, and he also wasn't willing to make the changes necessary to keep the PKK in this, to continue to solve the question. So, the peace process broke down, and although the PKK was also very much to blame with the Hendek Savaş in southeast Turkey. So I think now, it's been 10 years. I think Erdogan is a different person, and I don't know, maybe he's a little softer or tireder, but people say he needs the peace process in order to change the constitution so that he can, be president again. So that could be a possibility, and this is where I think some of the issues come, because as much as he wants to benefit from it, at the same time, it's going to lead to some big changes inside Turkey. Like I said earlier, when you have ex-cadre coming in, which is something the PKK wants, and you have them doing politics openly, and you end up releasing the mayors who are in prison, you're facing a different situation. So I believe Erdogan can lead that if he wants, because he's highly charismatic, he's highly experienced. So does he want to? Hopefully he does.
Thank you. We have two questions here. So we start with Dr.
Dr. Ibrahim Salah from Kurdish National Congress of North America. I really have a comment and maybe advice from you. We should convey our concern to the policymaker here or to the mediator to Ahmed
Ahmed Shah.
Look, I'm from Bashur. I witnessed all centralized governments of Iraq, from Communist Party of Abdul Karim Qasim to Arab Nationalist Party of Abdul Salam Arif, and then after that followed up by the Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party. One worse than other. All Kurdistan by centralized government was burned. Our area destroyed year after year. We got into this conflict, into this fighting. So what the benefit of central government? We lost a lot for Kurdish people. And they are also brought it down, weakened by this fighting. So what did they expect from centralized government of Ahmed al-Sha'ar? This guy, even if you sympathize, if you agree on something, he cannot do it. Look what the tribes of Arab tribes were did to the area. They cannot control them even. Very racist. These people are fanatics. He cannot himself control them. So we all in diaspora, I talked to some few of these policymakers. I did say what we suffer. I witnessed myself, my family, I'm from Bashur. My family been twice in exile, in Iran, in Turkey, again in Iran. So what? All my area was dignity of city of Rawandus, completely destroyed many times. So, and in Rojava, they did a great job at the time of the war. They created an autonomy in the time of the war. What could be admirable? And we, the Kurdish people, between the two sides, and we've been basically a lot of argument about who take the in charge of the army, the leader of the army. Between the two sides, they never reached the point. Thanks for Kak Masoud Barzani, who imposed on them and brought them together. This is the time. And if anything, if we lost something in Rojava, we gain a lot. Look at the sympathy. All the Kurdish of the world, they were on the street. And we are not going to let it go. And the mediator can be really, from here, we should reach any
Doctor, I'm sorry, I need to. Sorry, I need to interrupt you because we're running out of time. So I think the point you're making is that the Kurds need to be more forceful in terms of their demands for decentralization, not only in Syria, but also in other parts of Kurdistan. Thank you. Dilovan, please.
Yeah, so my question is really not a question, but a comment about Kurdish unity. Unfortunately, Kurds are not really, one of the issues that we've always had was strong unity. And I think geopolitical situation has impacted. The regional powers always divided us in one way or another. But there were a lot of attempts in Rojava to unite under the leadership of President Barzani, Masoud Barzani. There was the Erbil I agreement, Erbil II agreement, and then the Hook agreement. But they were rejected. And Rojava, one of the weaknesses of Rojava was that it didn't really have a broad-based government. And it was and the symbolism, PKK ruling the area, the region for 14 years, was a major threat to Turkey. So it was their biggest weakness. But today, Kurdish unity, as we've seen in the past month, has really maximized, or it's reached its climax in as far as I know. So do you think the future of Rojava, would it be a more broad-based government? Is Anakase and the other Kurdish parties, will the PYD make some concessions and allow the Kurdish parties to, and a hypothetical question for Eliza, we were talking about it earlier, had the PYD allowed the other Kurdish parties, the Anakase, the parties that are involved with Anakase, been part of a government in the past 14 years or 10 years or so, do you think the dynamics would have been different today?
Interesting, thank you. Maybe the first question to Dilshad and the second to Eliza.
Sure. So you're talking about a time where the fight with ISIS was the main driver for the existence of the Rojava and the PYD and the SDF and the whole thing. And at that time, I don't think PYD was considering any it was not a perfect time for political dialogue or not a perfect time for, hey, let's form a government or whatever. Their focus was mainly driven by the fight against ISIS. And even if you would talk with the base of the PYD at that time, the simplest answer would have been, we're dying in fight of ISIS. They're sitting in Istanbul, so they don't deserve that. And that was a very strong argument, to be honest, to be made. Now the dynamics changing. There's no more military wars, right? And SDF is integrated with the army. So it's time for those political concessions. It's time for political dynamics between those groups. And to be honest, a very strong message was received by the PYD that the Kurdish nationalism, which is not represented by the PYD mainly in Rojava, by the way, mainly independents or followers of other political parties, is strong and powerful. And I think we're gonna watch how PYD will be open for more democratic process and maybe do some elections and form a government based on unity.
Thank you.
Yeah, just going back to that time, I actually do think had they been able to, the PYD been able to settle with the opposition Kurdish parties, they would have been in a stronger position because they would have brought Masoud Barzani and the KDP onto their side. And it would have been a broad-based coalition. And actually, in my book, I go into that because I spoke with a lot of the NKSA people, some of whom do say, we probably should have also taken a different view at that time and not been as hardline and tried to find a way to work with the PYD.
Thank you. If Dr. Ivan if we can extend this for 5 more minutes, we have a couple more questions here.
Because also we have captions as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I understand. So I apologize for those who are asking. We can, we'll stick around for some time. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the time. Thank you.